But we begin tonight with the highest court in our land. Engraved above the oversized bronze doors on the Supreme Court's main entrance are the words, "Equal justice under law." For nearly 100 years, those words have welcomed every person who entered. Those words have real meaning, or at least they are supposed to. The Supreme Court's capitulation to Donald Trump yesterday makes those words ring hollow. It's not just that the Supreme Court waited more than 2 weeks after Trump made his appeal for them to make their decision to take up his claim of absolute presidential immunity. And it's not just that they won't hear it until April, giving Trump exactly what he wants, more delays. It's also how they're framing the case. In their one-page order, the justices say they will be debating just one question, quote, whether and if so to what extent does a former president enjoy presidential immunity from criminal prosecution for conduct alleged to have involved official acts during his tenure in office. That involve official acts? Meaning they're taking seriously the idea that overthrowing the government was part of Donald Trump's official acts as president. They are actually going to debate that. Why? The motive seems clear: to slow walk this decision. It may very well be that ultimately the court does not find in favor of Trump, but it would nonetheless give Trump a victory. The court could have set an expedited schedule in the case. Remember, the Bush v. Gore case took all of 4 days to run its course. Instead, the court will provide a de facto presidential immunity to Trump by potentially pushing the case until after the election. And it could impact some of Trump's other impending trials as well. Trump is claiming a presidential immunity defense both in his other federal case regarding the classified documents and in the Georgia state election interference case. And while no decisions have yet been made in either case, we could see the Supreme Court's decision giving Trump a way to further delay those as well. Once again, Trump can pull a Houdini and get out of accountability, at least before the presidential election. One might wonder what the Supreme Court justices get out of all this. Well, with the two most conservative justices, Thomas and Alito, reaching an age that normally would signal retirement, one might imagine that they would prefer to do so under a Republican president to maintain the court's conservative majority in perpetuity by ensuring that they will be replaced by much younger versions of themselves. That notion was also considered to play a factor in Bush v. Gore, which handed the White House to George W. Bush. And remember, 3 of the current sitting justices, Chief Justice Roberts, Justice Kavanaugh, and Justice Coney Barrett, worked on that case as lawyers for the Bush side. And the last remaining justice on the court from that decision, Justice Clarence Thomas, is married to a woman who vociferously argued for and interacted with Trump's inner circle, including his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, to support the idea that the election was stolen and that Trump's effort to, quote unquote, stop the steal was an official act. And now Trump's lawyers are going to come before the court and make Ginny Thomas's arguments in front of her husband. What the Supreme Court is doing is incentivizing Trump to become like the strongman he has long admired and remain president for life. The idea being that he is untouchable as long as he is the president. Perhaps Trump will ask for some tips from Hungary's authoritarian leader, Viktor Orban, when he privately visits with Trump next week at Mar-a-Lago. We all know Trump's affinity for the other global dictators like Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un. And who's going to stop Trump from staying in the White House until nature calls him? Congress? Don't make me laugh. We all know there is no longer any checks and balances. That's gone. Trump essentially owns the Supreme Court's conservatives who are doing his bidding, full stop. In Congress, you have a House Speaker who is in his pocket. With Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell stepping down, you're going to get a senator who is even more willing than Mitch to drink the MAGA Kool-Aid. So the courts won't stop him. The Congress won't stop him. That leaves it in the hands of the American people on November 5th. We're not going to be saved by any of these other bodies, folks. And the kicker to all of this, we already know that Trump's claim of absolute immunity is complete nonsense because there is a pretty strong historical precedent to rely on.
Now, therefore, I, Gerald R. Ford, President of the United States, pursuant to the pardon power conferred upon me by Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, have granted, and by these presents do grant, a full, free, and absolute pardon unto Richard Nixon.
That's right. President Gerald Ford would not have had to offer Richard Nixon a pardon if he was supposedly immune from criminal prosecution, which he was about to face. And how else do we know that Trump's whole presidential immunity defense is garbage? Well, we heard it directly from his own lawyer during his second impeachment hearing in 2021.
After he's out of office, you go and arrest him. So there is no opportunity where the President of the United States can run rampant in January at the end of his term and just go away scot-free. The Department of Justice does know what to do with such people. There is only the text of the Constitution which makes very clear that a former president is subject to criminal sanction after his presidency for any illegal acts he commits.
I am joined now by Lisa Rubin, MSNBC legal correspondent, Catherine Christian, NBC News and MSNBC legal analyst and former assistant district attorney in the Manhattan DA's office, and David Jolly, MSNBC political analyst and former Republican congressman who is no longer affiliated with the Republican Party. Lisa, I'm going to go to you and let you talk because you were so great on this yesterday. I was watching every single one of your TV hits and just saying, please get that lady in front of me so I can talk to her. Because you made the point that I repeated tonight. The single question that these justices are now going to debate is an absurd one. You just saw Gerald Ford. The idea that there's even a question of whether overthrowing the government is an official act of the president. I'm going to let you talk.
Well, I think that that's right, Joy, that it is an absurd question, and it's particularly absurd the way that the justices have framed it in their order yesterday. When the Supreme Court hears a case, they define the issues before them in something called a question or questions presented. Some cases have multiple questions, but this case only has one. And the way that it's framed is somewhat telling because it says, whether and if so, to what extent a former president enjoys immunity from criminal prosecution for conduct alleged to involve his official acts. And, you know, yesterday I was really troubled by the alleged, but having talked about this last night with Christy Greenberg, who's a former federal prosecutor, she pointed out to me that the whether and if so to what extent should also trouble us to some degree, because both Tanya Chutkan and the D.C. Circuit found that there is no immunity for a former president for official acts, full stop. Now the Supreme Court, in the way that they frame the question, seems to be suggesting that they want to parse that a little bit, that they want to carve out some form of official immunity, and more so that they want to allow perhaps the former president to define what is and is not official acts, rather than allow the Department of Justice to determine what that is based on the allegations of the indictment. So you're right. I think this is somewhat farcical. I'm not sure why the court is taking this case, if not to at least partially reverse the D.C. Circuit and make it all the more difficult for Tanya Chutkan or anybody else other than Juan Merchan here in New York State to try any of the criminal cases involving former President Trump before this election.
They're trying to re-elect him so that Alito and Ginny Thomas's husband can retire. I don't see any other answer to it. I'm going to come to you, Catherine Christian, because what's going to wind up happening is they're going to make these arguments in front of the husband of one of the insurrectionists. So I assume that he's one of the people who agrees that it is part of an official act. But I want to ask you a sort of separate question, because it does seem to me that this is ensuring that that the only questions that the American people will have answered before the election are whether or not Donald Trump paid a porn star, because the Alvin Bragg case is going to go forward, whether or not he is an adjudicated sex pest, which he is. He owes $83.8 million for sexual assault. right? And whether or not he is a liar about his wealth, which he is because he's been adjudicated, and the clock is ticking on that, and he owes a lot of money, half of $1 billion. So the American people will literally know everything they already knew about Donald Trump in 2016. Or they should have known. They're not going to know any of the important things. Like, for instance, did he steal classified documents? Here are the proposed schedules for that case, Catherine. Jack Smith has proposed July 8th as a trial date to begin. Donald Trump and his lawyer, Dale Rivera, have proposed August 2nd. I will note that July 8th is during the month of the Republican convention, and August is when it's over, and he's probably the nominee. Your thoughts?
Exactly. And it's interesting that basically the only cases that, and they involve money, except for the Manhattan DA's office case, that have held Donald Trump accountable involve his pocketbook. You know, the civil fraud case with Judge Engoron, Jean Carroll, when he was found liable, yes, for sexual assault, which is sexual abuse in New York is sexual assault, and defamation. So those cases, and we don't know the verdict that's going to happen in the Manhattan DA's office case. It's hard to fathom that any one of the 9 justices are actually going to rule that trying to overturn the election in several states could be considered an official act, but they took the case. And I can only think they took the case because, as a friend of mine said when I said they wouldn't take the case, of course they're going to take the case. They want to have the last word. They're going to say, we're the Supreme Court. We're the one who's going to decide this. That, to me, is the only reason why I think they took the case, or the 5 people who voted for it to grant certiorari.
If there is one true thing that's been said about the Trump era, it is friend of the show Rick Wilson's contention and the title of his book, Everything Trump Touches Dies. Another thing that's true is that once upon a time, Donald Trump was one of the most referenced figures in hip-hop music. He was name-dropped more than 300 times in popular rap songs, with his name standing in for the idea of extreme wealth, bling, success. But when he ran for president in 2016, those rappers, including some who knew him personally and even partied with him on occasion at Mar-a-Lago, weren't exactly lining up to endorse him. Only one big-name rapper did, sort of. Kanye West said right after the election that if he had voted, he would have voted for Trump. Then he became pals with Trump, including an Oval Office photo session with Ye wearing a MAGA hat and ranting. Things kind of went sideways for Ye's public reputation after that for a number of reasons, the luncheon with the Nazi being one of them, and that weird moment with that Candace lady in the White Lives Matter shirts. But it seemed like a lot of other rappers saw what happened with Trump and took it to heart to maintain their distance. Fast forward to today, when Donald Trump is now an adjudicated sexual assaulter. He's been fined $450 million and counting for his fraudulent business practices in New York, meaning the whole reason hip-hop loved him was a lie, plus those 91 criminal counts. But, meanwhile, just days ago, and meanwhile, Trump just days ago said that black people like him specifically because of his indictments and his mugshot. And days before that, an obscure right-wing Fox commentator said that black people will vote for Trump because they love the sneakers. They just love sneakers. So it seems like a really weird time for any rapper at all, to jump on board with anything associated with the Trump brand. And yet, just this week, rapper Fat Joe seemed to do just that.
Just show him the box first, what it says. It's friends and family, there's only 50 of these.
I gotta get my hands on him. Once again, I'm not a Trumper. I dislike Trump. I'm not voting for him, not now, not never. But I'm a sneaker collector into the art, so I had to find these.
I'm joined now by Teray, host of Masters of the Game and creative director at The Grio. And I'm so glad you're available because I really wanted to talk to you about this, Teray, because you've interviewed a lot of these guys. You know Fat Joe, you know these guys. There were a few things that were weird about that live. Number one, the fact that he had a branded box, which kind of said to me that Trump maybe is sending these to people so that they will do an unboxing, maybe. I don't know if that's how it struck you, but the whole thing struck me as odd. He said, I dislike Trump. A lot of people thought he said, I just like Trump. He said, I dislike Trump. Why do you think that he decided to do this whole unboxing of Trump sneakers? I mean, they're not quality sneakers.
No, when I first saw Joe doing this, I was like, no, not Joe. Guy from the Bronx, been part of hip hop culture for a very long time. But as he explains it, he is a collector. He is into sneakers. He does not care about Trump. He doesn't like Trump. He doesn't support Trump. The guy, Fat Joe has like 3,000 pairs of sneakers. He's a collector. He wants to have all the sneakers out there. I'm sure he has the Marty McFlys. He's got every sort of rare sneaker that you could get. So it's about being a collector, not about supporting Trump. He's saying he doesn't like Trump, but like he wants to have all the sneakers. But there's a thing that's sort of implicit in your question. The hip hop that you and I grew up on in the 80s and 90s was political. It was Chuck D, Tupac, KRS-One, Poor Righteous Teachers. They were political. They were making critiques of America, critiques of the president. We don't have that sort of hip hop anymore. And I'm not saying they're dumb. There's a lot of extraordinarily intelligent rappers, but there's a lot of money in the game now. There's a lot of branding in the game now. And it's really about getting people's attention on you. There's not a lot of politicized hip hop like the sort that we grew up on. So expecting hip hop in general to have a political response, which we grew up on, it's not what the game is doing now.
But it's not even just, I mean, look, I worked, like I said, toward the end of the Obama campaign. Like there were hip hop artists, including Jay-Z, who were like openly stumping for Obama, right? I mean, you know, will.i.am is not like a traditional hip hop artist, but he supported Obama, like made his speech into a hit song. I mean, I remember interviewing Luther Campbell, Uncle Luke, like before Donald Trump ran. And that was the era when it was probably safe if you were really going to come out for him. And he just talked about the fact that, you know, hip hop artists used to be at Mar-a-Lago. They didn't like have some big objection to Trump. But I know that you didn't see a flood of rappers, even though they did know him and knew who he was and referenced him. They weren't referencing him then. Uncle Luke just recently put up a post saying you'd be crazy to vote for Trump after he said that BS about you know, black people liking him because he was indicted. He was like, and this guy knows Trump. So I just wonder what you make of the fact that you have now hip hop artists willing to associate their brand with him, knowing what we know about him, 1 million people dead from COVID, you know, the things he did as president. Does it surprise you that people who are usually so brand aware would let their brand be associated with him now?
You know all those videos when people go to Trump rallies and they ask them ridiculous questions and then they give ridiculous answers that don't make sense, that don't comport with political reality? We see a lot of that with the rappers who are talking about why they support Trump. Kanye said when he wears the hat, he feels like Superman. What does that mean? Sexy Red, very popular rapper last year, said that she supports Trump because she appreciates the stimulus checks. Right. Joy, which party was part
Democrats.
Of getting us those stimulus checks?
It was Nancy Pelosi. Right. it was the Democrats.
So the Sexy Red is giving credit to Trump for something that he did not do and that he opposed. But she does not understand. She doesn't sit around reading the New York Times or watching your show. So she doesn't understand. She knows when Trump was president, I got a check in the mail. I love that. Let's do that again.
You know, and the thing is, I will give him credit in this, is that the marketing on that, he opposed the stimulus, but he put that letter in with the stimulus check so that people who got the physical checks in the mail thought he gave it to them. That was a genius marketing move. Maybe Biden should do that. You know what I mean? Instead of doing like border theater, like maybe that's the thing, is that people do respond to the idea of somebody doing something that impacts their lives directly financially, right? And that kind of is like the good politics.
I think implicit in this conversation is this notion that the right wing is trying to spread, that more black men are going to the Republican Party and to Trump. And as you've said on this show, we have seen about 15% of black men supporting the Republican Party since 1968.
Always.
Right? We are not seeing
and they're going to do it again.
Change.
And we need to talk about the 6 in 10 white voters that are going to vote for Trump. It's not the black. I'm telling y'all, if all 14% of black men who vote for Trump did it again, that's not the reason he would win. Teray, my friend, thank you very much.